The first time I laid eyes on him, I was struggling to carry 3 plates piled high with steaming pasta and a pitcher of ice water. It was just another Friday night shift at Bissimo, the kind of fancy Italian restaurant where I'd been working as a waitress for the last 8 months. My feet were killing me in those stupid mandatory black heels, and my smile felt totally fake after 7 straight hours of catering to demanding customers who barely even glanced my way. But then, he walked in, and everything changed. I didn't even hear the door open. The restaurant was just too loud with the clinking of silverware and all the background noise of hushed conversations. But I definitely felt the shift in the atmosphere. The maitre d' straightened his already perfect posture. The bartender's hands actually faltered for a second while he was pouring a drink. Even the head chef, who was practically glued to the kitchen during service, was peering through the service window. "Table 7, my coworker Mia whispered, giving me a nudge with her elbow as she walked past. "That's Victor Volkov. Don't screw this up." I delivered my pasta plates, just relieved that my hands weren't shaking from the sudden nervousness that made my heart skip a beat. As I turned around, I finally got my first look at him. The man who was about to turn my whole world upside down. He didn't look anything like the monsters you read about in fairy tales, not the way dangerous men are supposed to look. Victor Volkov was devastatingly handsome in that severe, aristocratic way that just screams old money and even older violence. His charcoal suit fit his broad shoulders like it had been tailored specifically for him, and his dark hair, with just a touch of silver at the temples, was combed straight back from a face that looked like it had been carved out of marble. But it was his eyes that really got to me. Pale blue, almost colorless, like Arctic ice. He wasn't alone. 2 men were flanking him like shadows, their eyes constantly scanning the entire room. A third guy was checking his phone every few seconds. Bodyguards, obviously. And seated across from him was a woman with diamond earrings that probably cost more than I made in a year. Table 7 was in my section. "You want to switch?" Mia offered, sensing my hesitation. I should have taken her up on it. I should have just bolted out the back door and never looked back. But I was saving every penny I could for college, and guys like Victor Volkov always tipped really well. Besides, what could really happen in a crowded restaurant, right? "I got it," I said, straightening my black apron and tucking a stray strand of hair behind my ear. I walked up to the table with the practiced professionalism I'd perfected over the last 8 months. "Good evening. Welcome to Bissimo. My name is Ellie, and I'll be your server tonight. Can I start you off with something from the bar?" The woman spoke first, ordering a cosmopolitan in a voice that made it clear she thought it was beneath her to even speak to the waitstaff. The bodyguards didn't order anything. And Victor Volkov, he just looked right through me, continuing his conversation with the man sitting to his right. I just stood there, feeling totally invisible. It wasn't unusual. Wealthy customers often treated servers like we were just furniture. But something about being dismissed by him specifically made my cheeks burn. I cleared my throat softly. "Sir, would you care for a drink?" His pale eyes flicked in my direction, and the conversation stopped right in the middle of a sentence. The entire table went silent. In that instant, I realized I'd made a huge mistake. You just don't interrupt Victor Volkov. His gaze traveled slowly from my face down to my name tag, lingering there for a moment before meeting my eyes again. When he finally spoke, it was in Russian, a language I only recognized because my grandmother had spoken it to me when I was a little kid. "Malishka," he said, his voice deep and smooth, like aged whiskey. His companions laughed, and the woman covered her smile with her perfectly manicured fingers. I knew enough to understand that he'd called me Little Waitress, and there was something about it that felt like he was both acknowledging and mocking me at the same time. Heat crawled up my neck, and I could feel the stares from the nearby tables. My humiliation was quickly turning into a spectacle. 8 months of rude customers. 8 months of wearing shoes that were too tight and dealing with back pain, and men who thought a $5 tip gave them the right to touch my hand. 8 months of working double shifts while trying to keep up with night classes. And now this guy thought he could make fun of me in a language he assumed I wouldn't understand. But my grandmother hadn't just taught me to recognize Russian. She'd made damn sure I could speak it, too. "Yep," I replied in perfect Russian. I'd be happy to give you some extra time to decide what you'd like to drink. Sometimes important decisions require additional consideration. I smiled pleasantly, just the way I'd been trained to. The silence that followed was absolute. Victor's eyes widened almost imperceptibly, the only real indication that I'd surprised him. His bodyguards tensed. The woman's smile vanished completely. "You speak Russian," Victor said finally, switching to English. It wasn't a question. "My grandmother was from St. Petersburg," I answered, keeping my professional smile plastered on my face. "Would you prefer that I fetch another server?" Something shifted in his expression. A flicker of interest, like I'd suddenly transformed from a piece of furniture into an actual human being. "No," he said, his gaze never leaving mine. "I would not prefer that." He ordered a vodka. Neat. Russian, and definitely not the cheap stuff. His companions resumed breathing. I nodded and turned to walk away, feeling his eyes following me the whole way to the bar. "What was that all about?" Mia asked when I got to the service station. "Nothing," I lied. "Just taking their drink order." But it wasn't nothing. And somehow I just knew it. That interaction, brief as it was, had set something in motion. I felt it in the prickling sensation between my shoulder blades, in the way the bartender rushed to fill Victor's order first, in the curious glances from my coworkers. I delivered their drinks with careful precision, making sure not to meet Victor's gaze again. But as I set the crystal tumbler of vodka down in front of him, his fingers brushed against mine. Deliberately, unmistakably. "Spasibo, Ellie," he said, thanking me and using my name in a way that sounded like he owned it. I nodded and retreated, but his touch lingered on my skin like a brand. The rest of their meal passed without incident. They ordered extravagantly. Caviar, truffle pasta, the chef's special that wasn't even listed on the menu. Victor barely touched his food, instead watching his companions eat while nursing his vodka. Occasionally, I caught him looking at me as I served other tables. Not staring. Nothing that obvious. Just brief glances that felt like physical contact. When they finally left, the table was immaculate, except for a black credit card and a folded piece of paper. I processed the payment. The bill was over $800, and I returned with the receipt. Victor signed it without even looking at the total, then stood up. He was taller than I'd realized, his presence taking up more space than his physical body. "It was a pleasure, Ellie from St. Petersburg," he said, the corner of his mouth lifting in what might have been a smile on anyone else. On him, it looked dangerous. "Perhaps we will meet again." They left, and the restaurant seemed to exhale collectively. I cleared the table on autopilot, my mind still trying to process the entire encounter. It wasn't until I was counting my tips in the back room that I remembered the folded piece of paper. I pulled it out of my apron pocket and opened it up. Written in elegant script was a phone number, and beneath it the words, "For when you're ready for more interesting conversations." I should have thrown it away immediately. Instead, I tucked it back into my pocket, telling myself I was just too tired to look for a trash can. That night, I dreamed of pale blue eyes watching me from the shadows. I woke up to my phone ringing. It was Mia, and her voice was unusually tense. "Ellie, are you okay?" "Yeah. Why wouldn't I be?" I mumbled, still half asleep. "You need to check the news right now." I fumbled for my laptop, pulled up the local news site, and felt my blood run cold. The headline read, "Local restaurant scene of violent altercation. 2 hospitalized." The restaurant was Bissimo. The article mentioned a dispute between patrons that had happened shortly after I'd left the night before. "What happened?" I asked Mia, my mouth dry. "They're saying some guys tried to approach Volkov in the parking lot. It didn't end well for them." She paused. "Ellie, everyone's talking about how you spoke Russian to him. The manager wants to see you before your shift today." "I didn't do anything wrong," I protested, but my voice sounded weak, even to my own ears. "Just be careful, okay? Guys like him don't notice girls like us unless they want something." I hung up and sat on my bed, staring at the wall of my tiny studio apartment. My gaze drifted to my apron hanging on the doorknob, the folded piece of paper still visible in the pocket. For when you're ready for more interesting conversations. I had no idea that when would come much sooner than I expected, or that those interesting conversations would change my life forever. The manager didn't fire me, but it was a close call. You're lucky Mr. Volkov left a generous tip and complimented the service, Marco said, pacing back and forth in his cramped office while I sat rigidly in the worn visitor's chair. Otherwise, I'd have to let you go. We can't afford to be associated with incidents. He meant violence. He meant the kind of people who leave men hospitalized in parking lots. I didn't do anything wrong, I repeated, the same words I'd said to Mia, but they sounded even less convincing now. Marco sighed, running a hand through his thinning hair. Just stick to English from now on, okay? And if he comes back, I'll have Derek serve his table. I nodded, relieved to still have my job, but also somehow irritated that my interaction with Victor would be handed over to Derek, who couldn't tell a Cabernet from a Merlot and always smelled faintly of weed. My shift that day passed in a blur of normality that felt totally surreal after the previous night. Regular customers ordering their usual dishes. Businessmen discussing quarterly reports over linguine. Tourists taking photos of their tiramisu. There was no sign of Victor Volkov or his entourage, but I felt like I was being watched. Every time the door opened, my head snapped up. Every dark sedan that drove past the window made my heart race. By the end of my shift, my nerves were completely frayed, and my coworkers had definitely noticed. You look like you've seen a ghost, Mia said as we changed out of our uniforms in the cramped employee bathroom. Are you still freaked out about last night? I forced a laugh. I'm just tired, and I have an exam tomorrow. Mia looked unconvinced but didn't push it. Want to grab a drink at Murphy's? A bunch of us are going. Rain check, I said, slinging my bag over my shoulder. I really do need to study. The lie came easily, even though I wasn't really sure why I was lying. I had no real plans except to go home, take a hot shower, and try to forget about pale blue eyes and folded notes. The problem with lies, though, is they have a way of becoming complicated. As I stepped out the back door into the alley behind Bissimo, a sleek black car idled at the curb. I froze, my hand automatically reaching for the pepper spray in my bag. The rear window slid down, revealing Victor Volkov's impassive face. Good evening, Ellie, he said as casually as if we had planned this whole thing. I glanced back at the restaurant door, calculating my chances of making it back inside before. Before what? I wasn't even sure what I was afraid of exactly, just that my instincts were screaming, danger. Your colleagues will be leaving through the front, Victor said, reading my thoughts. Marco always locks the back door after the last person exits. It's a security measure. The fact that he knew this, that he was aware of our closing procedures, sent a chill down my spine. What do you want? I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. A conversation? His lips curved slightly. An interesting one. As promised. I'm not interested, I said, even though the folded piece of paper sitting in my apartment suggested otherwise. Why had I kept it? Victor nodded as if my resistance was expected, even appropriate. Perhaps you would be interested in discussing the two men currently recovering at St. Mary's Hospital. The ones who were planning to rob the restaurant's employees as they left work last night. My blood ran cold. What are you talking about? My security team intercepted them. They had knives, duct tape, and detailed knowledge of which employees would be carrying the most cash, specifically which female employees. His gaze was steady. Including you, Ellie, from St. Petersburg. I wanted to believe he was lying, but something in his tone rang with terrible truth. I'd walked home alone countless times after late shifts, keys clutched tightly between my fingers as a makeshift weapon, the thought of what might have happened. Why would you? I trailed off, unsure of what I was even asking. Why would I intervene? Victor supplied. Or why would I tell you about it? Both, I thought, but said nothing. He studied me for a long moment. Get in the car, Ellie. I promise you will be returned home safely. But this alley is not the place for the conversation we need to have. Every warning bell in my head was ringing. Get in a car with a man I barely knew. A man connected to violence and who clearly operated outside the law. It was the definition of a bad decision. "I have pepper spray," I said, which was possibly the stupidest response I could have given. Victor actually smiled then, a genuine expression that transformed his severe features. "I would expect nothing less from you. Your caution is warranted. Perhaps a compromise." He reached into his jacket, and I tensed, but he only withdrew a business card, holding it out to me through the window. "My restaurant tomorrow night at 8 o'clock. Will be in public. You can bring a friend if you wish, and you'll have answers to the questions you're afraid to ask." I hesitated, then took the card. Volk was embossed in simple black letters on heavy cream cardstock, along with an address in the wealthiest part of the city. "How did you know I'd be leaving now?" I asked, tucking the card into my pocket. Victor's smile faded. "That, Ellie, is one of the questions I intend to answer tomorrow night." He nodded once. Then the window slid up, reflecting my confused face back at me as the car pulled smoothly away from the curb. I stood there for a full minute, heart pounding, before walking quickly toward the bus stop. I checked over my shoulder every few steps, unable to shake the feeling that I was still being watched. That night I barely slept. I kept replaying Victor's words, trying to separate fact from manipulation. Were there really men planning to attack Bissimo's employees? Or was it just a story designed to make him seem like a protector instead of a predator? I remembered the news article Mia had sent me. 2 men hospitalized. Could have been a coincidence or a dispute among criminals, or Viktor Volkov could have saved my life without me even knowing I was in danger. The next morning, I called in sick to Bissimo for the first time since I'd started working there. I just couldn't face the routine of serving pasta and smiling at strangers while the shadow loomed over my life. Instead, I spent the day in the campus library, trying to study for my business management exam and failing miserably. By 7 that evening, I'd made my decision. I would go to Volk, hear what Victor had to say, and then walk away. I would transfer to a different restaurant, maybe even a different part of the city. I would file away this bizarre interlude as an anecdote to tell someday when it no longer seemed dangerous. Mia called as I was getting dressed. "Feeling better? Marco was pissed that you called out." "Still a little under the weather," I lied, applying mascara with a steady hand. "But I'll be in tomorrow." "You better. It's Friday and you know Derek can't handle the dinner rush alone." She paused. "You sound weird. Are you really okay?" I glanced at my reflection in the mirror. I'd chosen a simple black dress, modest but flattering, and low heels. My blonde hair was pulled back in a neat ponytail, and I'd kept my makeup minimal. I looked like I was going to a job interview, not meeting a dangerous man for an interesting conversation. "I'm fine," I said. "Just tired." "Well, rest up and check your email." Marco sent out a new schedule with shift changes. After we hung up, I stared at my phone, debating whether to text anyone, about where I was going. But what would I even say? Meeting the Russian Mafia guy from work. If I don't come back, check the river. Instead, I took a photo of Victor's business card and emailed it to myself with the subject line, "Meeting at 8 p.m. A pathetic digital breadcrumb that would probably be totally useless if something actually happened to me. Volk was located in a restored historic building downtown. Its entrance was marked only by a small, tasteful sign bearing the same embossed logo as the business card. No flashy lights, no line of people waiting to get in. Just a solid oak door and a man in a dark suit who nodded at me as if he'd been expecting me. "Miss Eleanor Hayes?" he asked, his accent even thicker than Victor's. When I nodded, he opened the door for me. "Mr. Volkov is waiting for you." The restaurant's interior was a study in understated luxury. Soft lighting, dark wood, white tablecloths, and widely spaced tables that promised privacy. Classical music played at a volume that allowed conversation without requiring raised voices. Every table was occupied, the clientele an interesting mix of business types, wealthy couples, and what I suspected were political figures. A hostess in a simple black dress led me through the main dining room and up a curved staircase to a private area overlooking the rest of the restaurant. Victor stood as I approached, dressed in another impeccable suit. this one a deep navy that made his pale eyes even more striking. "Ellie," he said, and somehow my ordinary name sounded different coming from his mouth. "Thank you for coming." I remained standing, suddenly unsure of my decision. From this vantage point, I could see the entire restaurant, including the 2 suited men stationed at the bottom of the stairs. Not exactly subtle. "Your guards aren't very discreet," I said, nodding in their direction. Victor's mouth quirked. "They're not meant to be. Please sit. Would you like something to drink?" I sat down, keeping my back straight and my hands visible on the table. "Water is fine." He signaled to a server who seemed to materialize out of nowhere, ordering water for me and what sounded like scotch for himself. When we were alone again, he studied me with that unsettling intensity. "You have questions," he said finally. "Ask them." I had 100 questions, but I started with the most pressing. Were there really men planning to attack Bissimo's employees? "Yes," he answered without hesitation. 3 men, to be precise. Former employees of a rival establishment with a history of similar crimes. They typically target female servers leaving work with cash tips. His expression darkened. 2 are in the hospital. The 3rd is elsewhere. The implication made me shiver. "And you just happened to be there to stop them?" "No," Victor said, accepting his drink from the returning server. He waited until we were alone again before continuing. "I had been informed of their plans and arranged for them to be intercepted." "Informed by whom?" I pressed. Victor took a sip of his scotch, considering me. "I have many sources of information in this city, Ellie. Very little happens that I do not eventually hear about." "That's not an answer," I said, surprising myself with my boldness. "It's the only answer you'll get on that particular question," he replied, not unkindly. "Some information would put you in more danger, not less." The server returned with a selection of appetizers I hadn't seen him order. Small, elegant portions of what looked like very expensive food. My stomach growled traitorously. "Please eat," Victor said, gesturing to the spread. "The chef here is excellent." I hesitated, then took a small bite of something that turned out to be the best crab cake I'd ever tasted. "Why am I here, Mr. Volkov?" "Victor," he corrected. "And you're here because I find you interesting, Ellie Hayes. A waitress who speaks fluent Russian, studies business management, and faces down a table of strangers without flinching. You're not what you appear to be." The fact that he knew my full name and what I was studying sent another chill through me. "I'm exactly what I appear to be," I countered. "Just a student working to pay the bills." Victor leaned forward slightly. "Your grandmother was Yelena Petrova before she married Thomas Hayes. She fled St. Petersburg, then Leningrad in 1989 with your mother, who was only 4 years old at the time. Your grandfather stayed behind and was never heard from again." I set down my fork, my appetite completely gone. "How do you know this?" "As I said, I have sources." He held my gaze. "What you may not know is why they fled." My pulse quickened. Grandmother had never spoken about why they left Russia, and my mother claimed not to remember anything about it. It was a family mystery I'd long since accepted would never be solved. Your grandfather, Mail Petrov, was a mathematician working for the Soviet government on projects of significant interest to certain intelligence agencies. When he attempted to defect with research materials, arrangements were made for your grandmother and mother to escape. He was meant to follow but never made it out. I felt dizzy, like the floor was tilting beneath me. "Why are you telling me this?" Victor's expression was unreadable. "Because, Ellie from St. Petersburg, our meeting was not a coincidence. And the danger you faced did not begin with those men in the parking lot." "What do you mean it wasn't a coincidence?" My voice had dropped to a whisper, even though no one could possibly overhear us in this secluded corner. "Did you know who I was before I spoke Russian to you?" Victor's eyes never left mine. "Yes." One simple word, but it shattered everything I thought I knew about our encounter. "How?" I demanded. "Why?" He took another sip of his scotch, unhurried. 3 weeks ago, a former KGB officer living in Berlin was found dead in his apartment. Heart attack, according to the official report. Before he died, he sent a package to a post office box in this city. The package contained documents dating back to the Soviet era, including a list of names. Your grandfather's was among them. I don't understand what this has to do with me, I said, though a cold dread was spreading through my chest. The document suggested that your grandfather's research didn't die with him, Victor continued, that he had entrusted certain information to your grandmother before her escape. Information that would still be valuable today. I shook my head, disbelieving. My grandmother was a seamstress. She made wedding dresses until her arthritis got too bad. She wasn't some spy with secret codes. Perhaps not knowingly, Victor conceded. But Mail Petrov was brilliant, and desperate men find creative solutions. The same. People who've been hunting for his research for decades think he might have stashed it away in something he gave your grandma or your mom, something you might have now. My brain went into overdrive, trying to remember the few things I inherited from my grandmother after she passed away 2 years ago. A silver samovar, a bunch of Russian fairy tales, her wedding ring. Nothing that could possibly hold Cold War secrets. This is insane, I said, pushing my chair back. I think I should go. Victor didn't try to physically stop me, but what he said next froze me in place. The guys in the parking lot weren't just random criminals, Ellie. They were sent to abduct you, not rob you, just like others have been watching your apartment, your campus, and your workplace for the past couple of weeks. That's not possible, I whispered. But even as I said it, I remembered the prickling sensation of being watched, the dark cars that seemed to idle too long on my street. I've had you under protection from the moment I found out you might be a target, Victor said, his voice softening a little. But I couldn't approach you directly without risking alerting the people looking for Petrov's research. When you spoke Russian to me at the restaurant, you forced my hand. Now they know for sure that you're Yelena's granddaughter. My legs felt weak, and I sank back into my chair. Who are they? Former intelligence operatives now working in private enterprise. People who believe your grandfather's research could be worth billions in today's market. He leaned forward. People I have a personal interest in stopping. Why? I asked. What's your stake in this? For the first time, Victor hesitated, as if trying to figure out how much to tell me. Your grandfather's work involved encryption methods that were decades ahead of their time. Methods that could make digital communications either completely secure or completely vulnerable, depending on who controls them. And you want to control them, I said, finally understanding. Victor's expression hardened. I want to make sure they don't fall into the wrong hands. Hands that would use them to steal from the accounts of people who trust their banks to keep their money safe, to intercept private communications, to blackmail and extort without consequence. And your hands are the right ones? I couldn't hide the skepticism in my voice. He actually smiled at that, a brief flash of white teeth. My hands are far from clean, Ellie. But in this matter, yes, my interests align with the greater good. I protect what's mine, and I consider this city mine. The implication was clear. He was a criminal, but one with a code, a territorial predator who still maintained a certain order in his domain. So what now? I asked, trying to process everything. I don't have whatever they're looking for. I don't even know what it might be. Perhaps, Victor acknowledged. But they won't believe that without searching everything you own and questioning you thoroughly. The way he said questioning made it clear what kind of questioning he meant. A chill ran down my spine. Are you saying I'm in danger right now? Not at this moment. Not in my restaurant. Not in my presence. His certainty was both reassuring and terrifying. But yes, you are in danger, which is why I'm offering you my protection. Your protection, I repeated. The phrase sounded medieval, like something a lord might offer a peasant at a price. What exactly does that mean? It means you'll stay in one of my properties under guard until we resolve this situation. You'll continue your studies. I'll arrange for secure transportation to your classes. You'll want for nothing material and you'll be safe. I stared at him, incredulous. You're asking me to just move in with you? With a complete stranger? A criminal? Victor's eyebrows rose slightly. I'm offering you security when there are people willing to kidnap or kill you. As for being a stranger, He gestured to the space between us. We're becoming acquainted rather quickly, wouldn't you say? Despite everything, the fear, the confusion, the sheer insanity of the situation, I felt a laugh bubble up. This is crazy. You know that, right? This whole conversation is absolutely insane. The world is often insane, Victor replied, surprisingly philosophical. We simply do our best to navigate it. I took a long drink of my water, wishing it were something stronger. What if I say no? What if I just go to the police? And tell them what? That you're being targeted by former Soviet spies because of Cold War research your grandfather may have hidden in a wedding ring? His voice was gentle, but the message was clear. The police can't protect you from these people. They operate in shadows too deep for law enforcement to reach. And you operate in those same shadows, I pointed out. Victor inclined his head, acknowledging the point. Which is precisely why I can offer protection they cannot. I fell silent, staring at my half-eaten food. None of this felt real, and yet the fear twisting in my gut was undeniable. I thought about going back to my apartment, lying awake all night, listening for unusual sounds, jumping at every car that drove past. I need to think, I said finally. This is a lot. Of course, Victor said, as if we were discussing something mundane like a business proposal. But I'm afraid time is limited. The men who were watching you will have reported our meeting by now. Their employers will accelerate their plans. How convenient, I said, unable to keep the bitterness from my voice. Create a sense of urgency so I don't have time to think clearly. Something flashed in Victor's pale eyes. Anger, perhaps, or respect. You think I'm manipulating you, aren't you? Yes, he admitted candidly. But not in the way you believe. The danger is real, Ellie. I didn't create it, but I am offering a way through it. A server appeared with the main course, something that smelled delicious, but that I had no appetite for. Victor dismissed him with a gesture. Tell me this, I said when we were alone again. If I accept your protection, what do you get out of it? You're not doing this out of the goodness of your heart. No, I'm not, Victor agreed. I want to find Petrov's research before anyone else does. Having you close makes that more likely. You might remember something your grandmother said or did that could lead us to it. You might recognize something in the documents from Berlin that wouldn't mean anything to me. At least he was honest about his motives. But there was something else. Something in the way he watched me that suggested another interest entirely. I wasn't naive enough to miss it. And that's all? I challenged. Victor's lips curved slightly. I also enjoy your company, Ellie Hayes. You're direct in a way few people dare to be with me. It's refreshing. Heat crept into my cheeks, and I looked away, annoyed at myself for the reaction. I need guarantees, I said, focusing on practicalities. If, and it's a big if, I agree to this arrangement, I need to know I can leave whenever I want. Agreed, Victor said without hesitation. You'll be protected, not imprisoned. You may leave at any time, though I would strongly advise against it until the situation is resolved. And how long will that take? That depends on how quickly we can locate what they're looking for. Days, possibly weeks. Weeks. The thought of spending weeks under Viktor Volkov's roof, under his intense gaze, made my pulse quicken in a way that wasn't entirely fear. I have conditions, I said, surprising myself with my boldness. I keep my job at Bissimo. I maintain contact with my friends. No one can know about this arrangement, but I won't disappear from my life. Victor considered this. Your job would put you at unnecessary risk. But I understand your desire for normalcy and independence. Perhaps a compromise. You take a leave of absence from Bissimo, and I find you a position here at VOG if you wish to continue working. I glanced around at the elegant restaurant. I've never worked anywhere this upscale. You're a quick learner, Victor said with such certainty that I wondered what else he knew about me. As for maintaining contact with friends, that can be arranged, provided communications are secure and meetings take place in controlled locations. It felt surreal to be negotiating the terms of my own protective custody with a man who was essentially a crime lord. Yet here I was, haggling like we were discussing a used car instead of my life. "One last thing," I said. "I want to know everything you find out about my grandfather and grandmother. No secrets." Victor's expression turned serious. "Some knowledge is dangerous, Ellie." "So is ignorance," I countered. "This is my family. We're talking about my history. I have a right to know." He studied me for a long moment, then nodded once, decisively. "Very well. No secrets about your family's past. But understand that once you know certain things, you cannot unknow them. And some truths are harder to live with than uncertainty." His words sent a chill through me, but I held firm. "I need to know." "Then you will," Victor promised. "Do we have an agreement?" The sensible answer would have been no. The sane response would have been to walk away, to take my chances with the police, or to flee the city entirely. But something told me Victor was telling the truth about the danger. And another, more troubling part of me was intrigued by him, by this glimpse into a world so different from my own. "I need to pack some things," I said, which wasn't exactly a yes, but wasn't a no either. Victor nodded, seemingly satisfied. "My driver will take you to your apartment and wait while you gather what you need. One of my security team will accompany you to ensure your safety." Everything was moving so quickly. "Tonight? Now?" "Yes," Victor said simply. "As I said, time is limited." He stood, offering me his hand to help me up. After a moment's hesitation, I took it. His palm was warm and dry, his grip firm but not crushing. A businessman's handshake except for the calluses that suggested he was familiar with other kinds of work. "Your life is about to change, Ellie Hayes," Victor said, still holding my hand. "But I promise you this. No harm will come to you while you're under my protection." I believed him, and that was perhaps the most terrifying part of all. I believed a dangerous man I barely knew over the safety of the life I'd built for myself. As we descended the stairs, as the suited men fell into step behind us, as Victor guided me through the restaurant with a hand hovering near but not touching the small of my back, I felt as though I was stepping off a cliff with no idea how far I would fall or what waited at the bottom. The black car was waiting outside, engine running. Victor opened the door for me himself, then surprised me by stepping back. "You won't be coming?" I asked, suddenly apprehensive about being alone with his men. "I have business to attend to," he said. "But I'll join you later this evening. Mikul will ensure your safety in the meantime." He nodded to the driver, a broad-shouldered man with a grim expression. I hesitated at the door of the car, seized by a last-minute doubt. How do I know I can trust you? How do I know this isn't some elaborate trap? Victor's pale eyes gleamed in the streetlight. "You don't," he said simply. "Just as I don't know if I can truly trust you. We're both taking a risk, Ellie Hayes. The difference is that I'm accustomed to such risks." It wasn't comforting, but it was honest. I slid into the car's plush leather back seat, and Victor closed the door behind me. Through the window, I watched him turn and walk back into the restaurant, straight-backed and confident. A man entirely comfortable in his power. The car pulled away from the curb, carrying me toward a future I couldn't begin to imagine. My apartment looked different as I packed, like a place that belonged to someone else. The faded blue couch, the mismatched dishes, the textbooks stacked on the coffee table, all artifacts from a life that suddenly felt distant. I moved mechanically, putting clothes into a suitcase while Mikul waited silently by the door, his broad frame making my small studio seem even tinier. "How long should I pack for?" I asked, holding up a sweater, unsure whether to include it. "Take what matters to you," he replied in a heavily accented rumble. "The rest can be replaced." I looked around at my possessions, mostly secondhand. Nothing valuable except for the few items I'd inherited from my grandmother. Those I packed carefully. The silver samovar, too ornate for my simple apartment. The leather-bound collection of fairy tales with Cyrillic text. Her wedding ring, which I'd kept in a small jewelry box since she'd pressed it into my hand on her deathbed. "Babushka's treasures," I murmured, wrapping the samovar in a t-shirt for protection. Mikul's eyes tracked my movements. "The old woman's things. Mr. Volkov will want to see them." Of course, he would. I hesitated, then added my photo albums and laptop to the suitcase. As an afterthought, I grabbed the textbooks for my current classes. Ready, I said, though I felt anything but. The drive to Victor's home was longer than I expected, taking us out of the city and into the wooded hills that overlooked it. We passed through a gate with a guardhouse, then up a winding driveway lined with old trees. When the house came into view, I couldn't suppress a gasp. House was an understatement. The structure was a modernist mansion of glass, steel, and stone perched on the hillside like a geometric eagle's nest. Lights illuminated the terrace gardens, and water features glimmered in the darkness. "This is where Victor lives?" I asked, trying to keep the awe from my voice. Mikuel's eyes met mine in the rearview mirror. "One of Mr. Fokoff's properties. The most secure. The most secure." The words were a stark reminder of why I was here. Not as a guest, but as someone in danger, someone hiding. A woman met us at the entrance. Tall, blonde, and intimidatingly elegant in a simple black dress. "Welcome, Ms. Hayes. I'm Irina, Mr. Fokoff's house manager. Please follow me." She led me through the house, which was just as impressive inside as out. Soaring ceilings, minimalist furniture that probably cost more than a year of my tuition, art pieces that looked museum-worthy. Everything was tasteful, expensive, and utterly impersonal. No photos, no mementos, nothing to suggest that a real person lived here rather than staged it for a luxury real estate listing. "This will be your suite," Irina said, opening double doors to reveal a bedroom larger than my entire apartment. "The bathroom is through there and the closet beyond. I've taken the liberty of having some essentials prepared for you, but if you need anything else, please use the house phone to call me." I stepped into the room, taking in the king-sized bed with its pristine white linens, the sitting area with a view of the city lights far below, the fresh flowers on the bedside table. "When will Victor be here?" I asked, setting my suitcase down. "Mr. Fokoff will arrive later this evening," Irina replied, her expression giving nothing away. "He asked that you make yourself comfortable. Dinner can be served in your room if you prefer, or in the dining room." "I'm not hungry," I said, though I realized I hadn't actually eaten at the restaurant. "But thank you." Irina nodded and withdrew, closing the doors behind her with a soft click. For the first time since Victor had appeared outside Bissimo, I was alone. I sank onto the edge of the bed, the reality of my situation finally hitting me. I was in a stranger's house miles from the city because I believed men were trying to kidnap me over Cold War secrets my grandfather might have hidden decades ago. Either I was having a psychotic break, or my life had turned into a spy thriller overnight. My phone chimed with a text from Mia. Asterisk, feeling better? Murphy's tomorrow night. Asterisk, I stared at the message, unsure how to respond. What was I supposed to say? Asterisk, sorry, can't make it. Hiding out in a Russian mobster's mansion. Asterisk, still sick, I typed finally. Asterisk, rain check. Asterisk, I set the phone down and began unpacking, if only to give myself something normal to do. I arranged my grandmother's items on the dresser. The samovar gleaming in the soft light, the book of fairy tales beside it, the jewelry box containing her ring. As I placed the ring box down, a memory surfaced. My grandmother twisting the ring on her finger as she told me stories, always the same nervous gesture. "When you find something precious," she told me once, asterisk, you keep it close, but never so close that others can see its value. Asterisk, I opened the box and took out the ring. A simple gold band with no stones. Nothing special except for the sentimental value. On impulse, I tried it on. It fit perfectly on my right ring finger, which surprised me. I'd always thought my grandmother's hands were smaller than mine. I was still looking at the ring when a soft knock came at the door. Expecting Irina, I called, "Come in." Instead, Victor entered, looking exactly as he had at the restaurant despite the late hour. Impeccable suit, not a hair out of place. The only difference was a slight softening around his eyes, a hint of fatigue. "You're settling in," he observed, taking in the half-unpacked suitcase. I rose from the bed, suddenly conscious of being in a bedroom with him. "Yes, thank you for the room. It's very nice." Victor's mouth quirked at my understated description. "Irina said you declined dinner." You should eat, Ellie. I'm not hungry, I repeated, though my stomach chose that moment to growl traitorously. He crossed to the sitting area and gestured to one of the chairs. Join me for a moment. It wasn't exactly a command, but it wasn't quite a request either. I sat, keeping my back straight, hands folded in my lap like a schoolgirl called to the principal's office. Victor took the chair opposite mine, his posture relaxed but alert. You're wearing your grandmother's ring, he noted, his gaze falling to my hand. I resisted the urge to hide it. Yes, it's one of the few things I have from her. May I? He extended his hand. I hesitated, then slowly offered my hand. His fingers were warm as they took mine, turning my hand to examine the ring. His touch was clinical but still intimate enough to make my pulse quicken. A simple wedding band, he murmured. Gold. Soviet-era craftsmanship. He looked up, his pale eyes meeting mine. Did your grandmother ever mention anything unusual about it? I shook my head. It's just a wedding ring. She never took it off, not even after my grandfather disappeared. Victor released my hand, and I withdrew it quickly, resisting the urge to rub away the lingering sensation of his touch. Your possessions from her. We'll need to examine them, he said. There are non-invasive scanning technologies that can detect if something has been hidden inside objects, or if papers have been treated with chemicals to conceal text. You think my grandmother's samovar might have secret compartments? I couldn't keep the skepticism from my voice. I think your grandfather was ingenious and desperate, Victor replied seriously. Such combinations often produce creative solutions. I glanced at the items on the dresser. Fine, but I want to be present when they're examined. Of course. He studied me for a moment. You're handling this situation remarkably well, Ellie Hayes. Am I? I laughed, a sound with no humor in it. I don't think I've processed it yet. Ask me again tomorrow when I wake up in a stranger's house, hiding from Soviet-era ghosts. Not a stranger, Victor corrected softly. Not anymore. There was something in his gaze that made me look away, uncomfortable with the intensity. We've had dinner and one conversation. That hardly makes us friends. No, not friends, he agreed, but connected nonetheless. Your grandfather's past and my present have intersected in a way neither of us could have predicted. And what exactly is your present, Victor? I asked boldly. You've never actually said what you do beyond vague references to protecting what's yours. His expression revealed nothing. I have business interests throughout the city and beyond. Restaurants, real estate, import-export operations, and the less legal aspects. Victor's lips curved slightly. You're very direct. I think I've earned the right to be, I countered. He inclined his head, acknowledging the point. I operate in gray areas. Yes, I provide certain services that exist outside conventional legal frameworks. Protection, conflict resolution, information brokerage. You're a criminal, I translated. By some definitions, he conceded. Though I prefer to think of myself as someone who recognizes that the law is often an imperfect instrument for achieving justice or maintaining order. It was the kind of rationalization I would have scoffed at in my business ethics class. But sitting here in his house, with the weight of his protection between me and unknown threats, I couldn't bring myself to judge him too harshly. Get some rest, Victor said, rising from his chair. Tomorrow we'll begin examining your grandmother's possessions, and I'll have more information about the people looking for Petrov's research. He moved toward the door, then paused, looking back at me. The security system is state-of-the-art. There are guards patrolling the grounds. You're safe here, Ellie. Safe from everyone except you, I said softly. Something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or respect. I told you before, you may leave at any time. I'm not your jailer, just my protector, I said, unable to keep a hint of irony from my voice. For now, Victor replied, his gaze lingering on mine for a moment before he turned and left, closing the door silently behind him. I sat there for a long while, looking out at the distant city lights, feeling like I was watching my old life from an unreachable distance. Eventually, Exhaustion overtook me, and I curled up on the enormous bed, still fully dressed, and fell into a fitful sleep. I dreamed of my grandmother that night. Not the grandmother I had known, the plump, gentle woman who baked Russian tea cakes and hummed folk songs as she sewed, but a younger version, running through snowy streets with a small child in her arms, looking over her shoulder in terror. I woke gasping, disoriented in the unfamiliar room. Sunlight streamed through windows I'd forgotten to cover, and for a moment, I couldn't remember where I was. Then it all came flooding back. Victor, the supposed threat, my impulsive decision to accept his protection. A soft knock at the door preceded Irina's entrance with a breakfast tray. "Good morning, Miss Hayes. Mr. Volkov thought you might prefer to. I ate in your room this morning." I sat up, running a hand through my tangled hair. "Thank you. What time is it?" "Just after 9, she replied, setting the tray on a small table by the window. "Mr. Volkov asked me to inform you that he's arranged for a security team to accompany you to your afternoon class if you wish to attend." My Friday afternoon class. I completely forgotten. "Yes, I'd like to go. I have an exam next week." Irina nodded. "A car will be ready at noon. Is there anything else you need?" I glanced down at my rumpled clothes from yesterday. "I'd like to shower and change, of course. The bathroom is fully stocked, but if you need anything specific, please let me know." She moved to leave, then hesitated. "Ms. Hayes, Mr. Volkov rarely brings guests here, especially not on such short notice. You must be very important." Before I could respond, she was gone, leaving me to puzzle over her words as I picked at the gourmet breakfast she'd brought. Eggs Benedict, fresh fruit, and coffee that smelled like heaven. Important. The word felt wrong. I wasn't important. I was just connected to something important. A random descendant who might unknowingly possess a decades-old secret. Yet, the way Victor had looked at me last night suggested something more than just practical interest. I showered and dressed in my own clothes, jeans, a sweater, and boots. A small act of normalcy in this surreal situation. As I fastened my grandmother's ring on my finger, that same memory returned. Asterisk: when you find something precious, you keep it close, but never so close that others can see its value. The security team Victor assigned to accompany me to class was almost comically conspicuous. 2 broad-shouldered men in dark suits who flanked me like prison guards as I walked across campus. Fellow students stared, some nudging each other and whispering. Professor Harrison raised an eyebrow when my escorts deposited me at the classroom door with instructions to wait right outside. "New friends, Miss Hayes?" she asked dryly as I slipped into my usual seat. "Family, friends," I mumbled, face burning. "Just visiting." I could barely focus on the lecture about financial markets. My mind kept drifting to Victor, to my grandmother's belongings being examined for Cold War secrets, to the shadowy figures who apparently wanted to kidnap me. By the time class ended, I'd taken exactly 3 notes, none of them coherent. My guards materialized the moment I stepped out of the classroom. "Ms. Hayes, Mr. Volkov requested we bring you directly back to the house," the taller one said. "He has information to share with you." The drive back was tense and silent. I stared out the window, watching the city give way to wooded hills, wondering how my life had changed so dramatically in less than 48 hours. Victor was waiting in what appeared to be a study, a wood-paneled room with bookshelves, a massive desk, and windows overlooking the terrace gardens. He wasn't alone. A thin, bespectacled man in his 60s stood beside him, hands clasped behind his back. "Ellie," Victor greeted me, his expression giving nothing away. "This is Dr. Leonghov. He's been examining your grandmother's possessions." Dr. Leonghov nodded to me, but didn't offer to shake hands. "Miss Hayes, a pleasure to meet Yelena's granddaughter." His familiar tone when mentioning my grandmother sent a chill through me. "You knew her?" "No," he replied, "but I knew of her and of your grandfather. I worked in a related department during that time." I looked between them. "And did you find anything?" Victor gestured to the desk where my grandmother's items were arranged. The samovar, the book, and I noticed with a flash of alarm her ring. I touched my finger reflexively, finding it bare. When did you take that? I demanded. I was wearing it this morning. We needed to examine all possibilities, Victor said, unapologetic. It was removed from your room while you were in class. The casual invasion of privacy infuriated me. You had no right. Perhaps not. Victor cut me off. But it was necessary and enlightening. He nodded to Dr. Leonov. Show her. The older man picked up the book of fairy tales and opened it to a seemingly random page. Look closely, Miss Hayes. What do you see? I took the book, still seething but curious despite myself. The page showed an illustration of Baba Yaga's chicken-legged hut with Cyrillic text flowing around it. It's just a fairy tale. I've read this book 100 times. Dr. Leonov shook his head. Look at the text itself, not the story. Particularly here and here. He pointed to specific passages. I squinted at the indicated sections, seeing nothing unusual. It's just Russian text. Hold it under this, Victor said, handing me what looked like a special flashlight with a bluish glow. Ultraviolet light reveals certain inks that are invisible to the naked eye. Skeptical but intrigued, I held the light over the page. A gasp escaped my lips as faint markings appeared between the printed lines. Tiny, precise notations in what looked like mathematical symbols. What is this? I whispered. Your grandfather's work, Dr. Leonov said, a note of reverence in his voice. Hidden in plain sight in a book of children's stories, he must have given to Yelena before her escape. The entire book is annotated this way. Equations, formulas, keys to his encryption method. I looked up at Victor, who was watching me intently. This is what they're after. These scribbles, those scribbles, as you call them, represent one of the most advanced encryption algorithms ever developed, he replied. Your grandfather created a method for secure communication that was decades ahead of its time. Even now, with quantum computing on the horizon, his approach remains theoretically unbreakable. Dr. Leonov nodded enthusiastically. Petrov was a genius. He understood that true security lay not in complexity alone, but in simplicity, elevated to complexity through perfect mathematical balance, like a perfect crystal impossible to forge, because its structure is too perfectly aligned. It was hard to reconcile this talk of mathematical genius with the grandfather I'd never known. A ghost, a name rarely mentioned in my family. There's more, Victor said, picking up the samovar. Dr. Leonov found this. He twisted the base, and to my surprise, it opened to reveal a small compartment containing a USB drive. That's impossible, I said. This samovar is from the Soviet era. USB drives didn't exist then. No. Dr. Leonov agreed. Someone added this much more recently. Your grandmother, perhaps, or someone who gave it to her. Victor handed me the drive. We haven't accessed this yet. I thought you should be present, given your connection. I held the small device, trying to process what was happening. So, my grandmother knew all those years. She knew she was carrying Soviet secrets. It seems likely, Victor said. Though she may not have understood their significance. She may have simply been keeping a promise to your grandfather, protecting what he entrusted to her. My vision blurred with unexpected tears. I thought of my grandmother, her quiet strength, her occasional melancholy. The way she'd sometimes stare out windows as if looking for someone who never arrived. Had she spent her entire life guarding these secrets, never telling a soul, not even her daughter or granddaughter? What happens now? I asked, wiping my eyes. Now we access the drive and see what it contains, Victor replied. Then we use what we find to ensure that those pursuing you understand that the game is over. The research has been found and secured. And then I can go home. My voice sounded small, even to my own ears. Something flickered in Victor's expression. Reluctance, perhaps. If that's what you want, yes, though I must caution you that your life may not be as it was before. Knowledge changes us, Ellie, and you now possess knowledge that many powerful people would still prefer remained hidden. He was right, of course. I couldn't unlearn what I now knew about my family, about the secrets hidden in ordinary objects, about the shadowy world that existed alongside the one I'd always known. I couldn't unknow Viktor Volkov. Let's see what's on the drive, I said, handing it back to him. Victor nodded to Dr. Lianghov, who connected the device to a laptop on the desk. We gathered around as files appeared on the screen, dozens of them with names in Cyrillic that meant nothing to me. These appear to be the complete theoretical framework, Dr. Leonov murmured, opening files that displayed complex equations and diagrams. And this? He clicked on a file named simply Yolina. This is a letter. The text was in Russian, but as I leaned closer, Victor began translating softly. Asterisk, my beloved Yolina. If you are reading this, then I have not made it out as planned. I am sorry for the burden I have placed on you and our Natasha. Please know that everything I have done, I did to secure a future for you both. The work enclosed represents my life's research, but it is nothing compared to the value of your life and our daughters. Guard it well, but not at the expense of your happiness. When the time is right, when the world is ready for this knowledge to be used for good rather than control, find someone trustworthy to whom you can pass this responsibility. Until then, live well and tell Natasha that her father loves her always. Silence fell as Victor finished. I felt tears streaming down my face, tears for grandparents I'd barely known, for secrets kept across generations, for the weight that had invisibly shaped my family's history. He knew he wouldn't make it, I said softly. Victor nodded. But he made sure your grandmother and mother did, and he ensured his work wouldn't fall into the wrong hands. He closed the laptop and turned to face me fully. Your grandfather was a remarkable man, Ellie, as was your grandmother, who kept his secret all these years. Dr. Lianghov excused himself, taking the laptop, but leaving the book and samovar. When we were alone, Victor's posture relaxed slightly. What will you do with the research? I asked, suddenly realizing I hadn't considered this crucial question. Protect it, Victor replied. Ensure it doesn't fall into hands that would use it to exploit others. And eventually, when the time is right, as your grandfather said, see that it benefits the right people. I studied his face, trying to read the truth in his expression. And I'm just supposed to trust that you're the right person for this? A self-admitted criminal? Victor's lips curved in a slight smile. You've trusted me this far, Ellie. He was right, but that didn't make my decision any easier. I need some time to think, I said. This is overwhelming. Of course, take all the time you need. He gestured to my grandmother's items. These belong to you. They've served their purpose, but their sentimental value remains. I gathered the book and samovar, cradling them against my chest like precious children. And the ring? Victor reached into his pocket and withdrew it, holding it out to me on his palm. Also yours, though you should know it too held a secret. The band is hollow, designed to conceal microfilm if necessary. It was empty when we examined it. I took the ring, slipping it back onto my finger where it belonged. Thank you for telling me. No secrets about your family's past. He reminded me, as promised. I nodded, then asked the question that had been building since I'd seen the hidden writing in the book. Are they still after me? The people who were watching me? Victor's expression hardened. Not for much longer. I've arranged to let certain parties know that Petrov's research has been recovered, and that it's under my protection now. Few would risk challenging me directly, especially for something they can no longer profit from. So I could go home, back to my apartment, my job, my classes. You could. Victor conceded. But is that what you want, Ellie? To return to serving pasta and struggling to make rent? To pretend you don't know what you now know? There was something in his voice. A challenge, but also an invitation. I'd glimpsed a world beyond my small existence, and part of me, a part one barely recognized, was reluctant to leave it behind. What's the alternative? I asked, my heart pounding. Victor stepped closer, not touching me, but near enough that I could feel the heat radiating from his body. Stay not as someone under protection, but as a partner in this endeavor. Your grandfather's legacy is yours as much as it is anyone's. Help me ensure it's used as he intended. As a partner? I repeated skeptically. You barely know me. I know enough, Victor said, his pale eyes intent on mine. I know you're intelligent, resilient, and unafraid to stand your ground. even against men like me. I know you value family and honor commitments. I know you speak your mind and ask direct questions. These are qualities I value, Ellie Hayes. It was perhaps the most direct compliment I'd ever received, and from the most unexpected source. And what about? I gestured vaguely between us, not quite able to articulate the tension that had been building since that first night in the restaurant. Victor's expression softened. That would be entirely separate from any business arrangement, and entirely up to you. My face burned, but I held his gaze. I need time to process everything, to decide what I want. Time you shall have, Victor agreed. But know this, Ellie from St. Petersburg. Whatever you decide about your grandfather's research, about your role in protecting it, my interest in you remains unchanged. You fascinated me before I knew your connection to Male Petrov. You fascinate me still. The intensity of his gaze made it hard to breathe. I clutched my grandmother's belongings closer, using them as a shield between us. I should go rest. Victor nodded, stepping back to give me space. Dinner will be served at 7 if you'd care to join me. No pressure, no decisions required. Just a meal between friends. The way he hesitated before the word friends made it clear he envisioned something quite different. And despite everything, the danger, the secrets, the uncertain future, I found myself nodding. I'd like that, I said, surprising myself with the truth of it. As I left the study, cradling my family heirlooms and newly discovered secrets, I felt Victor's eyes following me. I knew then that whatever path I chose, my life had irrevocably changed. There would be no returning to the person I was before. Viktor Volkov mocked me in Russian, and I stunned everyone by answering in kind. That shy waitress was gone.